Here. How's it going,
Hey,
Sam?
there he is.
Hi, it's
Great to
going
see you,
good.
Sam.
We apologize for any inconvenience that you may have had trying to drop in. We'll let everybody else know that Sam was here on time. However, Discord gave
Just
him a 10-minute timeout.
it
Oh my
knows
goodness.
it knows me. It's like we can't trust you on this
Not the
Yeah.
clean,
password.
well-behaved new server.
Well, we appreciate you coming on here at Adventure Game Hotspot on our launch event. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your gaming industry?
Okay, I am Sam Barlow. I've been, I guess, technically the things of note. I made a text game in 1999 called Isle, which became something of a cult text game. And then didn't do anything else for a while. And then I made a bunch of video games that we won't talk about. Got the chance to work on Silent Hill, made a couple of Silent Hill games. One of those was good. That was Silent Hill Shattered Memories on the Wii. And then did some more stuff. And then in 2015, I went independent. And since then, I've made three games that I guess are loosely connected in their formats, and that was Her Story, Telling Lies, and we just released Immortality. And those are, we can call them adventure games, right? They are
Yeah, some wouldn't, but
games that allow you to
we do.
explore a story. And in like my connection to text adventures, adventure gaming, and point and clicks is like a very deeply felt thing. And there was definitely a huge part of me when I was making Her Story was enjoying the connection to a text game, right? This when I kind of had the idea for Her Story, I was like, oh, this is kind of like what's fun about a text adventure parser, but without some of the problems and with some new opportunities. And then I guess with Immortality, I finally got around to, in some ways, making a point and click game. So that's me.
Well, you have a bunch of people in the chat praising you, telling you how much they love your games, and I think that Jack and I
So,
uh, we can applaud that as well. So, tell us a little bit about Her Story for those who haven't played it.
So if you haven't played Her Story, you still can. It's the beautiful thing about video games. They sit around and they wait for you to find them. So Her Story was my attempt to, like, I'd always loved police procedural things, murder mysteries, these kinds of stories. In fact, like that, the love of adventure gaming and text adventures, pretty much for me, like the biggies when I was growing up, for me were the kind of Infocom detective games, particularly Suspect. Even like Magnetic Scrolls made a game called Corruption, which wasn't necessarily a murder kind of detective game, but it had that format. But any of those games back then that kind of touched on, I remember on the CPC there was a game called Vera Cruz as well. That was like a kind of murder mystery thing. So I had this, always loved when video games did murder mystery stuff. And in working with the bigger publishers and pitching game ideas for like 10 years, I'd always pitched them, hey, police shows, cop shows, detective shows, murder mystery shows, serial killer things are huge in every media. Why aren't there more of them in video games? And was consistently told that they just don't work, that it's not ideal. Like video game people like active characters that have superpowers and all these kinds of things. So when I made Her Story, that was my mission was I want to go make a kind of detective game that does some things a bit differently. So I'd played, I love the Phoenix Wright games. What I loved about the Phoenix Wright games was there aren't that many games, and I think Phoenix Wright is quite singular in this sense where you have more than one twist. Like if if there's a game with a really cool twist, like a Bioshock or something, people are like, oh my god, this story is incredible. Like you get to the end after 10 hours and there's this amazing twist. Whereas the Phoenix Wright games would give you a twist like every 10 minutes, like a good story. Like it's constantly surprising you. There's constantly some reversal. So I love that about Phoenix Wright, but the extent to which it was very linear, very rigid, right? Like if you're playing Phoenix Wright and it goes well, you feel like you're being a detective, you feel like you're uncovering stuff. If it goes wrong, you just feel like you're smashing your head against this game that's been designed by someone. So her story was me trying to figure out, how do I make a detective game that has more freedom, where the deductions you're making and that kind of detective work feels a little bit more organic and natural. And after sort of immersing myself in the world of homicide detectives, to the point where I was reading through like all the kind of the manuals that homicide detectives read and are used to train, all the academic texts on like murder investigation and the psychology of murderers. And at this time, my wife on weekends would help out at the local library, like doing their little children's play hour or whatever. And so she knew like the head librarian. The head librarian was so scared by all these books that I was ordering into the library that were about murdering people and how to get away with murdering people, that he felt like he had to intervene and mention this to my wife. But that immersing myself in that world, the thing that sort of stuck was watching. So I was making the game in 2014. So it was just on the cusp of kind of this explosion in true crime. So I think Serial happened whilst I was making her story. Then Making a Murderer came out. But I was kind of discovering, as I guess the rest of the world was, with the kind of the rise of YouTube and just the availability of video and stuff on the internet, all these videotapes of real life crime investigations, right? Real life police interrogations. And so as part of my research, I was just watching a ton of these. And so at some point, it occurred to me that this could be the aesthetic of the game, right? And kind of prior to that, I was like, I don't know what this game is going to look like. Is it going to be anime people like Phoenix Wright? Is it going to be pixel art? Is it going to be 3D characters? But watching all these videos kind of really gave me the idea for the kind of core concept of Her Story, which, if people haven't played it, the premise of Her Story is you start the game and you're just dropped into this 90s computer desktop, kind of old school Windows 3.1 style. Maybe for hardcore adventure fans doesn't feel that old school, because you're like, anything above 640, 480 is not as beautiful. But you're dropped into this old school computer desktop, and all that's on there, really, there's a few things, but is a police database program. And the meat of the game is searching through this database, discovering clips, hundreds of clips of this woman being interviewed about her missing husband. And through listening to what she's saying, thinking of new things to search, you kind of slowly put this larger story together. And yeah, Her Story did very well. So I proved my point to all the big, bad, evil publishers that people do like murder mystery games.
Yeah, you not only created a brilliant game, you really established a new subgenre. I now have to refer to some new games as Her Story, because they've clearly been influenced by you. So, I mean, you've had quite an impact. We want to get to Immortality, your latest game, soon, but I have to say, you surprised me. You've been talking about how much you wanted to make a game and your gaming influences, and I was sure you were going to come from the other side, say, oh, my background is in film, and I really wanted to find a way to merge film with find a way to make film more interactive, because I mean your games are so cinematic, they're so filmic, basically. So I mean, what's your background in film? You must have some.
I mean, so I think it's funny because when I get interviewed by people who are from like the film side or whatever, they're like, oh, how is this a game? Why are you still doing the game thing? And I explain that, like, oh yeah, no, as long as I've been interested in making things, I've had a computer, right? I guess I was probably 8 or 9 or something when we got a home computer. We had a computer in our school. So to me, like, writing stories, doodling, as long as I was doing that, I was also writing little text games on my computer or kind of creating pixel art and stuff. But I mean, I've always loved film. I mean, I never intended, it was never clear to me that you could have a career in the creative world generally. Like, that wasn't the thing that I was aware of. So at various points, like, I read a ton. And so, you know, at some point I was like, oh, I'd love to write a novel. I used to paint a lot. So when I was in college, I exhibited a few paintings. That was the thing. Was obsessed, you know, I was obsessed with movies alongside all these other kind of art forms. So I've always been kind of passionate about that. You know, dipped my toe a little bit kind of at school and college in kind of theater, but as somebody that is a terrible actor, you know, it was always kind of on the periphery and everything. So had no kind of formal training in film or anything like that, other than this passion for it. And then once I was in games, slowly, I don't know if it was through my maneuvering or just through the universe up to its tricks, slowly got my way into more narrative games, right? So when I started out, my first professional game was a serious Sam game on the GameCube. Then I did a motocross bike stunt game, did a bunch of these games, got this chance to work on Silent Hill, where obviously the narrative is much more significant and that kind of gameplay. And, you know, that's much more, you know, the kind of game I would have liked to make. But even in making those games, so even on, I don't think I did anything on Serious Sam, but on this motocross game, the Crusty Demons of Dirt, got to be part of the voice acting, you know, process and on all the subsequent games. So through doing that, got to kind of learn from some amazing voice directors about how to direct and work with actors. On those games, was getting to script bits and pieces. You know, again, none of it super ambitious. So when we got to Silent Hill Origins, that's like a whole, we could do 2 hours just on that game. But we were brought in when the game had already been halfway through development at another studio, and we were being asked to fix it. And it was a beautiful opportunity because all of the people in charge were so worried and panicking about the fact that this game was not in a good state and we only had 6 months to ship it, that when I was like, hey, how about I'll just rewrite the whole script and we'll do our best to fix this thing. And they didn't really have any other options, and everything else would have taken longer. And I think they were like, well, what's your pedigree here? And I was like, well, I made this text adventure that people really liked in 1999. Check that out.
Wow.
And, you know, I wrote some, you know, I wrote some lines for Crusty Demons of Dirt, and, you know, I did a job on the Ghostwriter script and stuff. But, you know, no one was really in a position to not let me do that. So then I got to write Origins, which, to be fair, was like a week's work, because that's all we had time to do. And after that, after we had, you know, Silent Hill Origins is not a fantastic video game, but knowing where it was and where we got it to, it gave us a degree of kind of respect from Konami and other people, because they saw what we'd accomplished and what we'd managed to fix. So then getting to work on Silent Hill Shattered Memories, I think that was the first time I did full-on performance or motion capture. So getting to just get in the space, direct the actors, you know, obviously not with real cameras or anything, but, and, you know, from then, I spent 3 years working on a Legacy of Kain game. We did a year's worth of performance capture on that. There were some other games that didn't come out where we'd done bits and pieces. So really, when I got to Her Story, I had the confidence that I had now written a bunch of things, directed actors in a whole bunch of different setups. Mm-hmm. And I think what was part of the spark with Her Story was looking at the aesthetic of all these police interviews and being like, well, hang on a minute. I could film this and I wouldn't need to be good at filming to do it, right? It just needs to look like this is supposed to look as bad as something that's been, just the
Right,
camera
yeah.
stuck in a police room. So, I can get the performance and I don't have to worry about the scale of it. And then since then, the thing that's blown my mind every time is I've attempted, when I've started working with bigger and bigger crews, you always go in and although I'm technically the director, I always go in feeling quite humble because I'm like, look, these people have made tons of movies. They know more about this than I do. So I'm going to come in and I'll listen and not be too kind of didactic. But very quickly, you realize that I'm still the person that knows the most in the room because no one else can imagine this weird video game we're making, right? Like the end point is not something that anyone else can kind of conceive of. So even though I don't necessarily know exactly the technical ins and outs of how this particular light thing works or whatever, like I'm still the one that people can come to be like, why are we doing this? How should we do this? Do you have an opinion on X, Y, or Z or whatever? And yes, I mean, Immortality, the connected background, which is all about movies and obviously has a lot of interesting things in terms of the aesthetics and the different genres of movies. To some extent, that was like the game I'd been wanting to make for the version of me that was obsessed with movies, starting from being a teenager and just watching and being quite obsessive about movies and movie making. Like, that has, been there building up, and Immortality was a chance to kind of explore that.
Well, we've got about 6 minutes left, but a bunch of people on YouTube we want to hear about what you're working on. A bunch of people on YouTube are requesting that you zoom in on what you have in the back so we can see your plot on whatever game that you're working on.
That's okay. It's about time to take this down. This is plans for Immortality. I don't know if there's any huge spoilers. Yeah.
Look
over
that.
there. You can't see over here. On this other side, there's a bunch of index cards, which I have started to take down. That was some of the original kind of plotting. I think that's like, I don't know, 5% of the outline for Immortality up there.
So it looks like our YouTube followers helped us to transition right into Immortality. So tell us about it.
Immortality is a very part of our goal with Immortality was like to make something that was give ourselves permission to make something that was ambitious in a way that could have gone horribly wrong, but it seems to have worked. So the premise of Immortality is in 1968, there's this young actress, Marissa Marcel. She lands her first starring role in a movie. Subsequent to this, she only ever stars in 3 movies, and none of these 3 movies is ever released, and Marissa Marcel disappears. So you now have, in 2022, a mystery. Whatever happened to Marissa Marcel? These lost movies have never been seen. They've disappeared. So there's, they are kind of the holy grail of lost movies. And the premise of the game is we have found a cache of pieces of film from these 3 lost movies. And the experience of Immortality is that you get to explore all these little pieces of these lost movies. And by watching all these pieces of footage, putting together not just the 3 movies themselves, but this larger question of what happened to Marissa Marcel. And the fun way that you do that is we have this cool exploration mechanic where as you're watching a piece of film, and the kind of the framing, we're attempting to evoke the feel of like a classic moviola machine or linear editing. So it's analog film being fed through this machine. So you can kind of speed through the footage, rewind it, frame advance, kind of scrutinize it, become very obsessive about the film. And at any point, you can stop the footage and point to an item on screen, whether that's an actor's face, a prop, a little piece of, some interesting visual detail in the scene. And the game will immediately then take that and match cut to another piece of footage in which that occurs. So you essentially kind of start navigating, creating your own crazy montage So, if you're particularly interested in a certain character, you can click on them, jump to another scene with them in it. If you see a character, we talked about Chekhov's gun, see a character pick up a gun, that seems quite exciting and dramatic. You can click on the gun and then see another scene in which that gun is then used or appears in some other way. So it's, and I joked earlier, it's my first point and click game. It essentially takes that kind of mechanic. It's almost like the joke early on, although it's not that much of a joke, was that we were making Pokemon Snap meets Criterion Channel, right? It's this idea that you're still, you have a reticule, right? So many video games have these powerful reticules that you can point and click on things. And to use that to, instead of using that to shoot things or collect things, we're kind of using it to make a magical cut. And yeah, that's kind of how the game works. And so you're getting to explore these three movies, and they're from three different decades. So we have the first movie, Ambrosio's, from 1968. That is an adaptation of a real 19th century Gothic novel, The Monk. So that is very, very Gothic. Lots of blasphemy and sex going on in this monastery. Then the second movie, Minsky's, from 1970. That is this kind of proto-erotic thriller, crime thriller set in New York about a famous artist who's found dead, and the number one suspect is his artist model and muse, Franny. And as you can imagine, in this movie, the detective slowly falls for Franny. And then you have this third movie. There's this big gap, which is one of the intriguing questions. In 1999, Marissa Marcel films her final movie, and this is called Two of Everything, and it is a kind of neo-noir thriller about a pop star and her body double and some kind of fairly heinous things that happen to them. So, like I said, exploring quite a chunk of like the 20th century of movie making, getting to really, ultimately these last three games I've made, including this one, we find, game mechanic ways to make the player as obsessive as I am about things. So whereas, her story was like, let's deconstruct the murder mystery, let's get obsessive about that. With Telling Lies, we are kind of deconstructing the sort of undercover surveillance story and thinking about these characters' lives. With this one, it's, because we allowed ourselves to be ambitious, and we were like, let's deconstruct movies. Let's think about not just how movies are made, who makes them, why they're made, but like the history of movie making and storytelling in general. So it's pretty ambitious. And there's some spooky stuff as well.
We have a staff member in the YouTube chat that's basically doing a marketing pitch for you. His name's Pascal. He says, it is a cinematic game about cinema. Go buy it.
Yeah, it's definitely worth buying. I would definitely recommend people to buy it. Or, it is on Game Pass, which is one of these weird things. It's like it's on Game Pass, which is really cool because a bunch of people get to play it. And then I think it was PC. I don't know if we still have. We were, at least at launch, the highest rated game of the year on PC Gamer. And they put out a story about this, but the headline of the story was 2022's highest rated game is free to play right now on Game Pass. I was like, you could buy it on Steam, right?
Yeah.
I was like, it's cool that you're telling everyone.
It's okay if you pay for it too, I don't mind.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a fun and weird game, and I think I've been surprised you get value for money out of it. When we've seen like the hours people are racking up on this game.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something addictive about
worth the
finding
RRP.
that last piece of film or answering that last question. So, really well done on all three of your games. And unfortunately, because we lost a little time at the beginning, our time's up. But Sam, thank you so much for joining us, and all the best with Immortality, and keep up the good work. Can't wait to hear about the next one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sam, you're a legend.
There was one. Thank you. There was one review that concluded with, I have no idea where Sam can go after this or something. And it was like, crikey.
Well, you're going to tell us, right? I hope.
Yeah, we're gonna figure it out. We'll try and be more ambitious.
Thank you so much, Sam. You have
a
wonderful day. Thank you for joining us on Adventure Game Hotspot.
You too.
Appreciate it.
Good luck. Bye.